Adichie talks about the immense pressure Nigerian women face to get married, often leading them to make choices they wouldn't otherwise make.
It highlights how cultural expectations, particularly surrounding marriage and motherhood, can significantly impact women's agency and autonomy. It raises a question for you, listener. What are some cultural norms or expectations that you've encountered? Perhaps even...
Welcome to Witter. Who Has Time to Read? The podcast that brings deep dives for busy minds. Listen to AI hosts Jane and Dane and get ready to unpack the world's most captivating books in just a fraction of the time. Whether commuting, working out, or just squeezing in a quick break, we deliver key insights, thought-provoking themes, and takeaways you can carry into your day. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. Plus, use our links in the description to purchase this book. Your support helps us bring more engaging book discussions to you. Listen and follow us wherever you get your podcasts. Who has time to read? You do, with Witter.
Welcome back to Witter Deep Dives for Busy Minds. This month we're celebrating Black voices, and I am so excited to share this one with you. It's Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's We Should All Be Feminists. It's a quick read, but wow, it really packs a punch.
What I find fascinating is how Adichie takes this concept of feminism, which, can feel a bit daunting to some, and makes it so personal and approachable through her own experiences as a Nigerian woman.
It's so true, like that anecdote where her friend calls her a feminist at 14, and she's thinking, wait, is that an insult? I remember laughing out loud, but it also made me think about how that word feminist can be so loaded, even today.
It's true. It's almost as if the word itself has become a barrier to having open and honest conversations about gender equality. Adichie cleverly tackles this head on, using humor and personal stories to debunk the stereotypes and misconceptions surrounding feminism, especially within the context of her Nigerian upbringing.
It really challenges us to examine our own preconceived notions, doesn't it? She talks about how people told her feminists are unhappy women who hate men and can't find husbands. It's almost comical how these stereotypes persist.
And it's not just about the stereotypes themselves, but about the underlying power dynamics they reveal. Take, for instance, the story about the parking attendant in Lagos who thanks her male friend for the tip she gave him.
That one really struck me too. It's such a seemingly small interaction, but it speaks volumes about how deeply ingrained these assumptions are. It's like he couldn't even fathom that a woman would have money of her own.
Exactly. It subtly highlights how women's contributions, both financially and in other aspects of life, are often overlooked or minimized. I'm curious, listener, have you ever experienced something similar, where your contributions were dismissed or attributed to someone else, simply because of your gender?
It makes you wonder, doesn't it? What are some other ways, big or small, that these power dynamics play out in our everyday lives?
It's definitely something worth reflecting on. And what's interesting is that Adichie doesn't just focus on the negative impact of these expectations on women. She also explores how they can harm men by forcing them into a rigid cage of masculinity.
Oh, absolutely. That whole idea that men have to be strong and stoic all the time, never showing any vulnerability.
Think about it this way. By limiting the range of acceptable emotions and behaviors for men, we create a society where they are less likely to seek help when they need it and less able to form genuine connections with others.
It's almost like we're setting them up to fail.
In a way, yes. And this pressure to conform can have serious consequences, both for individuals and for society as a whole. It perpetuates a cycle of toxic masculinity that harms everyone.
So what's the solution? What does Adichie suggest we do to break free from these limiting gender roles?
Well, she proposes a fundamental shift in how we raise both boys and girls. It's about moving away from a focus on gender and towards a focus on individual abilities and interests, for example. She challenges the notion that cooking and childcare are inherently women's work.
Yes. She asks, why should a woman thank her husband for helping with the baby? As if it's some extraordinary act of kindness. It should be a shared responsibility.
Precisely. And by normalizing this shared responsibility from a young age, we can start to chip away at those ingrained gender roles.
I love that. And it's not just about the practical tasks themselves, but about the underlying message it sends.
Exactly. If we're constantly telling boys that certain tasks are beneath them or not manly, we're reinforcing the idea that they are somehow superior and don't need to contribute equally.
And on the flip side, we're sending girls the message that they are responsible for all the caregiving and domestic labor, which can limit their opportunities and aspirations.
It's a vicious cycle that we need to break free from.
What I found really powerful was how Adichie even as a successful author and feminist thinker, admitted to struggling with these expectations herself. Like that story about her deliberately wearing an ugly suit to teach a writing class, because she didn't want to be perceived as too feminine.
That really resonated with me too. It just goes to show how pervasive these biases are, even for someone who's actively challenging them.
It makes you realize that unlearning these ingrained gender roles is an ongoing process, even for those of us who are committed to equality.
And it's a journey we need to embark on together, recognizing that we all have a role to play in creating a more just and equitable society.
So true. And speaking of equality, I have to ask, how does Adichie define feminism? Because she has this way of cutting through all the noise and getting right to the heart of the matter.
She keeps it simple and powerful. Yeah. Feminist, a person who believes in the social, political, and economic equality of the sexes.
Boom. Mic drop moment right there. It's so clear, so concise, and so essential.
It really strips away all the baggage and misconceptions and boils it down to its core principle, equality for all, regardless of gender. And she doesn't shy away from using the word feminist either.
That's a great point. She specifically addresses this idea that we need to soften the language or avoid the F word altogether, arguing that diluting the message only weakens its impact.
It's like she's saying, let's not be afraid to call it what it is.
It's a powerful statement, especially coming from a Black woman who is challenging not only gender norms, but also cultural expectations within her own community.
And that brings us to a really crucial aspect of Adichie's work. Her perspective as a Nigerian woman, she brings a unique lens to the conversation about feminism, showing how gender dynamics intersect with cultural norms and expectations in ways that are often overlooked.
Absolutely. And this perspective is so important, especially during Black History Month, as we celebrate the voices and experiences of Black authors and thinkers. Adichie reminds us that feminism is not a monolithic concept. It must be adapted and nuanced to reflect the specific challenges and realities faced by women of different cultures and backgrounds. It's so important to have those diverse voices and perspectives within the feminist movement. Even within the same culture, experiences can vary widely. Adichie talks about the immense pressure Nigerian women face to get married, often leading them to make choices they wouldn't otherwise make.
It highlights how cultural expectations, particularly surrounding marriage and motherhood, can significantly impact women's agency and autonomy. It raises a question for you, listener. What are some cultural norms or expectations that you've encountered? Perhaps even within your own family or community. That can limit choices, particularly for women.
That's such a thought-provoking question. It really challenges us to examine the unwritten rules and societal pressures that shape our lives. And Adichie doesn't shy away from tackling other sensitive topics either. She brings up the concept of bottom power, the idea that women can use their sexuality to manipulate men and gain some semblance of power.
What's brilliant is how she dismantles that argument by pointing out that this so-called power is entirely dependent on men, and therefore not true power at all. It's about operating within existing power structures. Rather than challenging them, it's like playing a rigged game.
Exactly. And it perpetuates the harmful stereotype that women only have value in relation to men, further undermining their autonomy and agency.
And this ties back to Adichie's broader point about the need for men to be actively involved. In the conversation about gender equality, it's not just a women's issue. It's a human issue that requires collective effort and a willingness to challenge the status quo.
Absolutely. She calls on men to be allies, to speak up against sexism and gender bias in their everyday lives. It's about those small, seemingly insignificant moments that can actually make a big difference. Like when a waiter ignores a woman at a restaurant, a man can use that opportunity to say, hey, why haven't you greeted her?
Those subtle acts of allyship can have a ripple effect, creating a culture where sexism is no longer tolerated.
And Adichie doesn't just call out men. She also challenges women who perpetuate these harmful stereotypes and power dynamics. She talks about women who criticize other women for their choices, particularly around motherhood and careers.
It's that internalized misogyny that can be so damaging, dividing women instead of uniting them. It's a reminder that we need to be supportive of each other, recognizing that women's choices are valid and should be respected, regardless of whether we agree with them or not.
That's a powerful message, and it speaks to the need for intersectionality within the feminist movement. Adichie acknowledges that women face different challenges based on their race, class, sexual orientation, and other factors. It's not a one-size-fits-all movement.
Exactly. She talks about how systems of oppression can be blind to one another. Drawing on her own conversations with Black men about race and gender, it's about recognizing those intersections and working together to create a more just and equitable world for all.
That reminds me of something else she talks about that really struck a chord with me, how language itself can reflect and reinforce gender bias, like how we use the word respect to describe what a woman shows a man, but not the other way around. It's so subtle, but it reveals so much about how we perceive and value men and women differently.
It's fascinating, isn't it? It makes you realize how much our language shapes our thinking and perpetuates these unconscious biases. It's a call to be more mindful of the words we use and the messages they convey.
It's like she's urging us to question everything, to examine the underlying assumptions and power dynamics at play in even the most mundane interactions.
And she also challenges the notion that culture is static and unchanging. She points out that traditions can and do evolve, citing examples from her own Igbo culture. It's a reminder that we have the power to shape and reshape our culture, to create a more just and equitable world.
That's such an empowering message. It's not about accepting the status quo. It's about actively working to create the kind of world we want to live in.
And that's what makes Adichie's work so compelling. She doesn't just point out the problems, she offers solutions, urging us to embrace our individual agency and work together to dismantle these harmful systems of oppression.
She inspires us to challenge the status quo, to question everything, and to use our voices to create a more just and equitable world for all. It's not about being perfect, it's about progress. And it's about recognizing that we all have a role to play in this ongoing journey.
It's about those small, everyday acts of courage and compassion that, when multiplied across communities and societies, can truly transform the world.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into We Should All Be Feminists, what resonated most with you from this book? For me, it was Adichie's honesty about her own vulnerabilities and her call for a more nuanced understanding of feminism.
It's so refreshing to hear someone speak so openly and honestly about the complexities of navigating these issues, both personally and within a larger societal context.
It was so refreshing to hear someone speak so openly and honestly about the complexities of navigating these issues, both personally and within a larger societal context.
Yeah, it's that vulnerability that makes her message so relatable and resonant. It reminds us that we're all on this journey together, learning and growing along the way.
And as we continue this journey, I think it's important to keep in mind that feminism at its core is about creating a world where everyone has the opportunity to thrive, regardless of gender.
It's about recognizing and dismantling the systems and structures that perpetuate inequality and oppression. It's about challenging our own biases and assumptions and holding ourselves and each other accountable.
It's about empathy, compassion, and a willingness to listen and learn from each other's experiences. And ultimately, it's about creating a world where everyone feels seen, heard, and valued.
And that's a world worth fighting for, don't you think?
Absolutely. So as we wrap up this deep dive into We Should All Be Feminists, I want to pose a question to you, our listener. What resonated most with you from this book? And how can you apply Adichie's insights to your own life and your own interactions with the world?
We'd love to hear your thoughts. And to continue celebrating Black voices, what other Black authors have challenged your thinking or expanded your worldview? Let's keep this conversation going, not just during Black History Month, but all year round.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep those minds busy and those hearts open.
Thanks for listening to Witter, Who Has Time to Read, produced by One Media. Please support the author by purchasing the book or audiobook using the link in the description. It's a great way to help keep the art of writing alive. And stay in the loop. Subscribe to our newsletter for updates on weekly deep dives. And don't forget to share your thoughts or suggest our next deep dive at witterpodcast@gmail.com.